What's going on, everybody? We are back. We have episode number 103 of the Club and Sub podcast tonight. Tonight, Luke and myself are going to break down UFC Vegas 59. Uh, it's a weird card. I heard Sean Orr say this earlier on his Spaces, but it really looks quite a bit like a pandemic card here. But we will try to get you through it. As usual, guys, we're brought to you by betonline.ag. If you haven't deposited there yet, I suggest you do so. It's one of the best books for props and just UFC money lines in general. For a 50% bonus on your first $1,000 deposit, you can use the promo code Club Sub. And if you like the show, guys, please drop a like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. It helps us out. We're really trying to grind towards that 1,000 follower mark and go through there. Tonight, you got me, John, at MMA Fox. We got Luke at SWR_betting. Lags is actually moving from Florida back to Pennsylvania this week, so he will not be with us tonight. And yeah, so I guess with that we can jump into it. Luke, do you have any thoughts about the card in general? I struggle to think of many cards that on paper look worse.
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting fights. But yeah, from a general intrigue, general betting perspective, I'm not in love with it. I tell you what, the San Diego card next week is brutal as well. So, and of course, it's right at the end of our 12 weeks straight, of UFC cards where we're dragging a little bit of ass right here at the end. But nonetheless, a few interesting spots.
Yeah, the weird thing about that too is it seems like they've put a premium on putting out good cards for live events, but that one looks pretty destitute, outside of the main. But yeah, guys, we'll hop right into it here. First fight of the night, we got Mayra Bueno Silva. She's taking on Stephanie Egger. I have a small bet on Egger at plus 102. I wouldn't bet her at the current number, to be honest. This is about where I cap her in the minus 125, minus 130 range. I guess my thoughts broadly are just Mayra obviously is very physical, which is a very good thing for WMMA. She hits harder than most women in the division. Has decent jiu-jitsu off her back. But with that said, that's kind of where I think the positives of her stop. She's strong, she's physical, she hits hard, but she's low volume. She lets fighters get a lot of free volume off on her. And she doesn't really measure space particularly well. And when she's been put on her back, she just hasn't looked very good there. We saw Wu Yanan hold her down there. Pretty much everybody that's gotten on top of her has held her down. She's pretty happy to just throw up guard subs. And if you can avoid those, you're usually going to be okay. And so on the other side with Egger, look, I don't rate Stephanie Egger super highly. I think if she can't get this fight to the mat here, she's probably in big trouble. I think her striking is very wooden and she's very, very awkward. But what I can say is she's a fairly big woman. She's pretty strong and she has a very, very strong top game. She's a pretty high level black belt. She's very positionally responsible and she comes from a pretty decent judo background. And so my view on the fight is just if she can get Mayra down, she can definitely hold her there, likely dominate, maybe even finish from there. And so the entire fight comes down to me, whether or not Mayra can keep this fight standing. And I guess she could, but I don't really think Mayra controls distance very well at all. And so Egger should be able to, find the clinch spots that she excels in pretty well. And I think ultimately land the takedowns here and pretty much control her on top. For me, I look at her having competitive grappling exchanges with Tracy Cortez and even taking down Cortez a few times. And it makes me think, she should be able to handle Mayra in this spot. But again, she's wooden enough standing and lacks athleticism enough that I wouldn't really be dying to lay chalk on her now. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's I think you broke the fight down pretty well. I think it's kind of a binary type of fight. I know that Silva has the guard sub option on her back, but honestly, I think Egger's probably fine from top position. The girl survived 15 minutes against Gabby Garcia, who had 60 pounds on her. I know that's a grappling match, but pretty impressive to survive. And she was in dominant positions Gabby Garcia was in dominant positions for probably half of that match. And she didn't get submitted. So obviously a bit of a different scenario, but if that doesn't tell you anything about the girl's submission defense, I think, that's something important to note. So I think if it comes down to, pretty much if Egger can get those takedowns or not, I still think her striking is absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
I know Buena Silva isn't anything special, but like she can crack though. She's got some aggressive components. She hits hard. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked like if there was a scenario where Egger just couldn't get takedowns. I think Silva potentially could knock her out, to be honest. She just hasn't faced a ton of striking based adversity, and like why I guess I'm not piling on the Egger side personally. I'm picking her to win. It's just like even the fight against like Montana De La Rosa, where Montana was able to, secure and land multiple takedowns. Buena Silva, it's not like she just tipped over from TDAs in that fight. She actually put up a lot of resistance to Montana, who I think is a pretty decent, MMA-based wrestler.
Yeah.
Really, their only reason the fight was a draw was because there was a point deducted early from Silva, which I think it actually was a fence grab, which, obviously isn't a great look. But outside of there's a lot of other sequences where I thought her takedown defense actually looked pretty good. And at the end of the day, she was just able to, primarily win on damage. And I think that's a very real possibility here because I do think there's pretty distinct levels between the two on the feet. I just haven't seen enough from Egger outside of some outside, side kicks and pot shot kicks to make me think that she's going to handle the pressure of Silva particularly well. So I'm more so looking to just kind of live bet this fight because I think the first 5 minutes are going to tell us pretty much everything you need to know. If those takedowns come pretty easily for Egger, honestly, if she gets one, I'll probably hit her immediately. Like if it comes relatively easy, I'll probably have no issue jumping on her. So I am picking Egger because I think she is the girl who can most likely dictate potentially where this fight takes place. And to your point, I don't really think Silva probably stands up if she is able to get takedowns. So yeah, I'll go Egger by decision, but not a super confident take.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm with you there, and that's why it's only a small play for me. If I thought takedowns were a lock here, I'd obviously go a lot bigger in that kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, you made the right point. I mean, there's definitely a huge strength in that, or I don't know about strength, but a big athleticism gap here on the Silva end of things. Moving on though, we have a this is a fight that should be on no card ever in the UFC. We got Corey Mckenna taking on Miranda Granger. Any hot takes here, Luke?
Well, I was the bozo that laid over 2-1 on Mckenna against Elise Reed. I thought that was just a great matchup for her. Reed wasn't a very physically imposing fighter, a white belt on paper, had struggled with her defensive wrestling, wasn't a great striker. Thought Mckenna would go out there, shoot a ton of takedowns, land them with ease. Not particularly the case. She only went 3 for 7, and she decided to not really shoot takedowns till latter portions in the round. Ends up getting pot shotted from the outside. Obviously, we know that Granger's struggles so far in the UFC have come primarily on the floor against Lemos and Yoder. But I think a big talking point of this fight that can't really be ignored, I know it's kind of narrative and intangible based, but Miranda Granger is going to have a massive size advantage in this fight. She's going to have a 10-inch reach edge and a 4-inch height advantage too. And despite me thinking, obviously, the path for Corey Mckenna is on the ground with the wrestling and the grappling, I don't necessarily know if those takedowns come particularly easy for her at the same time. We've seen multiple examples of, the smaller girl on paper having a better path in that realm. And it just always hasn't came to fruition. John, you with me still?
Yeah. Sorry, I haven't submitted. You hear me?
Yep. All right, I'll keep going. But just a couple examples I want to note, Lupita Godinez has fought Luana Carolina. We saw, Kay Hansen fight Jasmine Jasdavicius, where, the two smaller girls in theory were, at least on paper, were the ones that were supposed to have, that more of that upside. And because there was just such a size deficiency there, it didn't really matter. Their takedowns got stuffed and they ended up losing. And I do think McKenna's boxing is serviceable for the level, but she has no head movement at all. She was getting hit very clean by Kay Hansen. Granger looks, pretty meh at space too, but I don't know, man. It's just after watching the Reed fight, I know it's only one fight, but there was just a lot of red flags that I took away from that fight at the same time. So if she can't get takedowns here with ease on Granger, I think this fight could be incredibly close. Obviously, the problem on Granger, outside of her just generally not being very good, she's coming off a 2-year layoff and having a baby, which isn't exactly, everything you're really clamoring to line up and play. But I don't know, man. I think it's one of those spots where the size could play, a really large X factor in this fight. So it's completely dog or pass. I might still actually just play Granger because I think this fight has the makings of potentially being close.
Yeah, so what's a bummer? My internet went out, so I had to connect to my phone, and I was really hoping I was going to miss the entire breakdown of this fight. But with that being said, yeah, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I guess for me, it's kind of weird because I think Mckenna has kind of cultivated this reputation of being like a very high-level grappler off of the Lemos fight, where, if you look at like any Amanda Lemos fight, if you're a positionally responsible grappler, you can usually hold her down fairly easily. And then obviously she survived in the Hansen fight, but didn't look great on bottom. And then the Reed fight, as you touched on. And I thought that was a decent spot for her. But there were two things that stood out to me. The first being, I thought she'd be able to be more competitive standing. Like I thought her boxing probably would have evolved a bit past where it was when we saw her on Contenders and in her fight with Hansen. But it really hasn't. And she gets hit flush quite a bit. The other thing is, she's just not a proactive grappler that often, and we even saw that in the Hansen fight. She just doesn't. That's her bread and butter. But since her regionals, which when she did go to it a lot,
We lose you, John.
She doesn't go to it that often, and I keep hearing people tell me, "You got me? You got me?"
I think I got you now. Oh, you're locked up again, bro.
All right. You got me now?
Yep.
Okay. Fucking Jesus. Yeah. Anyway, what I was saying, I keep hearing people talk about alpha male and talk about, she's going to turn into an elite wrestler. And it's like, well, when is the last time someone went to alpha male and got better at grappling? Like, I know that's the reputation years ago. It's true. Like, every time, we always talk about this. Oh, they're at alpha male. They might improve their grappling, and almost no one does. And on top of that, they're a horrible striking camp. And I look at this matchup. Look, you nailed the entire breakdown here. Granger's bad. She had a competitive kickboxing match with Hannah Goldie. I can't really rate her. But the truth of the matter is, Granger has a frame that's more akin to 125 pounds than 115 pounds. And so without the baby and her having the big layoff, I would almost definitely play her here. But there are enough questions. Because it's like, look, I have a kid. I can tell you definitely she was not doing any kind of heavy training for at least 18 of those 24 months.
You froze again, John.
So it's like there's a pretty good chance.
You're freezing up again, John.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm done breaking down that fight. Don't bet don't bet Corey Mckenna. If you want to bet Miranda Granger, feel free to take it away. Luke, if that happens again, just take it away and go to the next fight. I don't know what the hell's going on with my internet right now, but hopefully we're good to go from here. Anyway, moving on. We got Jason with Josh Quinlan. Luke, any hot takes here?
Honestly, I think Quinlan has some very fraudulent vibes, if I'm being completely honest. Like, it's kind of weird because I think he's largely looked, okay. I mean, but more so of a product that the guys he's fought have been fucking terrible and have kind of just let him, sit there and dance around the outside, pot shot, potentially land some takedowns, or even I've seen him get taken down by a couple pretty horrible guys, but he's been able to reverse them, get on top, land the occasional takedown here or there. Obviously has big power. The problem is Jason Witt just has no durability at this point. So it's like, it's one of those spots where I kind of think it's probably going to be very similar to like the Phil Rowe fight, where I think Jason Witt probably comes out here and actually has a decent first round, potentially wins it, but it's just, he's so live to die pretty much any time that this fight is at space. It's like, it's just hard to really have any sort of confidence in Jason Witt at this point. But what I will say is, once again, we haven't seen Quinlan's defensive wrestling tested all that much. Like I said, I don't think he's fought very many high-level guys. Is Jason Witt super high-level? No, but he does come out there, maximizes win condition. He is a good wrestler. So I think we are going to learn, at least a thing or two here about Quinlan, assuming that, he doesn't kill Witt on the first exchange or something like that. But it just has all the feelings of like trapped by the number on Witt. Like I can't trust him with my money at this point, but I do think Quinlan's a guy that I'm going to be probably looking to go against the grain on, especially if I think the best case scenario would be that he comes out here and highlight reels Jason Witt, and then he gets, pretty overvalued in his next spot. Cause I think there are certain aspects of his game that I think could get exposed at the UFC level. I think lastly, something interesting to note too, is he is coming off of steroid suspension too, that he actually said he self-admittedly took. So it wasn't a tainted supplement. He was, on the gas knowingly. So he's not on the gas for this fight. I think that's a little interesting as well. But yeah, the pick will be Quinlan by knockout, but I'm sure I'm not laying over 2-1 on it.
Yeah, I cannot go into the depths again on Witt, to be honest with you. And I'm going to keep it short because I don't want my internet to blow out of me again. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I don't rate Quinlan really at all. I think everything he touched on was great. Look, yeah, he gets taken down a lot and he gives up dominant positions and reverses them. That usually stops when you get to the UFC level. A good grappler is not going to get reversed that amount. It just doesn't happen. And he hits hard. I'll give him credit for that. I think he's a reasonably technical striker. It's just, I don't trust his grappling at all. I think he is a definitive liability there. And obviously, you'd say, well, John, why aren't you liking the plus money on Witt? And it's like, I have done this with Witt before. And the problem with Witt is his chin is at a point now where it is so bad. He is getting dropped at a higher clip than Francis Ngannou knocks people down. I am not making that up. That is literally like how often he is getting knocked down. And so it's at a point now with Witt where it's like, the thing is, I think Witt is going to win most of the minutes in this fight. I really do. I think he can get takedowns. I think he can potentially hold Quinlan down or dominate on top. The problem is he's going to probably have to spend somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes on the feet here. And I'm at the point that Quinlan's a big hitter and Witt has no defense standing. And it's at the point where I'm like, I'm usually the guy to fade finishes, but I'm like, I feel like Quinlan KO might be like over 50%, to be honest. And with that being the case, it's just, how do you trust Witt at that number? I understand the people who would like to bet Jason Witt here. And if you do, like, he's the side, like 100%. There's no way someone can watch Josh Quinlan tape and tell me they're comfortable laying minus 200 with him here. But Witt checks every box except the guy can't take a punch. And he gasses out. If he had better cardio, to be honest, I think I'd be more interested. But like you saw the Barberena fight, he looked solid early in that fight, but he kept having to shoot takedowns, and he almost got finished late in the fight because he basically just couldn't get him down anymore. So yeah, I think Witt needs to fight a pretty perfect fight here to win. He probably needs more than 10 minutes of top control if he can't get a finish on the mat. I think Quinlan's probably a better athlete and certainly more explosive. I might regret not betting on Jason Witt here, but I mean, the guy's been KO'd inside 15 seconds twice in the UFC already. I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm with you, Luke. Long term, I'm looking to fade Josh Quinlan, but this is not the spot, I don't think. And if I miss it, I miss it. I can live with that. Anyway, moving on. We got Takashi Sato taking on Brian Battle. I think you and I both have a bet here, Luke. You want to take it away?
Yeah, I'm a battle truther. I've backed him in both of his first two fights so far. I don't think he's like a spectacular athlete. I don't think he's like a spectacular fighter necessarily, but he does have a style that I think is going to keep him around in the UFC for quite a few years, I think. He's got really good cardio despite, his defense not being very good. He is pretty tough. He's shown he can weather and handle adversity pretty well. He's a guy who's going to sit there and pump volume over the course of 15 minutes. He's a pretty opportunistic grappler. He's went out there and submitted 2 brown belts now. He can shoot takedowns, and he kind of just weaponizes his cardio and tends to just, go out there and break guys over the course of 15 minutes and either, just outpoint him over the course of 15 minutes or finish him late as a result. And the problem with Sato is that he just doesn't really do anything, right? He's just this low volume southpaw who kind of bounces in and out. Like as a result, he's usually not getting like volumed up himself, but he's usually pretty cleanly losing like the overall minute to minute exchanges in his fights. And he's just the guy who's kind of looking for the big one shot, knockout. I know he's a black belt in judo, but he pretty much never wrestles. And anytime guys have gotten him down, he has this horrible tendency. I mean, like clockwork, he just gives his back pretty much every single time. Even if you go back to his regional fight outside of the UFC against Glyco Franca, he did the exact same thing as well. So that's my thing with at least in relation to this matchup when it hits the floor. It's like Battle's got a pretty good back take. If you give your back to Brian Battle, he's going to take it and he's going to finish you, right? I know homeboy Gunnar Nelson didn't do it, but honestly, that's because Nelson just decided to control a risk and just punch the guy from back mount for the entire time. I genuinely think Gunnar Nelson could have submitted him if he really wanted to, and Gunnar was just like fucking around for whatever reason. But yeah, so I think the floor upside favors Battle in this fight. The volume upside favors Battle. The cardio favors Battle. The minute to minute exchanges favor Battle. The durability favors Battle. So it's like if Sato doesn't catch him with a shot, which is theoretically possible. We've seen Battle hurt before. I'm not saying it's out of the question, but like outside of that, I don't really know how Takashi Sato wins this fight. So I think honestly anything below minus 300 is pretty good price on Brian Battle.
Yeah, I'm with you on Battle. I played him as well. I still think, yeah, I'm pretty much exactly with you there on anything below minus 300. And it's weird because this is not typically a chalk box that I usually like to bet. Like if I'm betting chalk, I usually want someone that I has a big grappling advantage. But in this case, like you touched on, it's kind of a numbers bet. Battle throws an incredible. I think he attempts 20 distance strikes a minute. It's something nutty like that. Versus Sato, who attempts 7. And it's one of those things where I know the big narrative and everything, or not the type of narrative, it's true, is that, Battle doesn't have great defense. But I actually think one of the reasons he outlands opponents so well is because he fights at the end of his range pretty well. Now, if you get inside his range, he's very hittable, but he does a pretty good job skirting the outside and avoiding, like you don't see him bite down in the pocket like that often. He's more content to kind of just play the back foot and throw volume. And on the Sato side, yeah, you're right. He's constantly just looking to set up the big shot. The thing is, even with that, he's not like setting traps to like walk you onto a counter. It's just really a 1-2. Like that's really all you have to look out for with him. And if he can't find it, he loses. And even if he can find it, again, he's got to knock you out. And I mean, if you want to tell me, for me to think Sato, like this isn't value, you'd have to tell me Sato KO is in the 20 to 25% range. And I just don't think that you can possibly get there. And to your point in the grappling, like even if Sato decides he wants to judo him, I'm very confident that Brian Battle, if they get in this rambles, is going to badly out grapple him. And I know he doesn't have like the best wrestling ever, but I also think people being like, oh, his wrestling looked terrible against Gore. Well, Gore actually showed he's got pretty good takedown defense against Brundage. I think if Battle goes for it here, he gets him down pretty easy and likely submits him easy. And to your point with the Nelson fight, something else, like I kind of agree if Gunnar been more aggressive, he gets him out. But if you watch, Sato was almost happy to just go 2-on-1 and not get subbed. Like there was no attempt to really get out of the position. He was just like, okay, I'm not going to get finished here. And so, yeah, I think the scope for I think the way you put it, with Battle's floor being very high is very accurate. Like, you cannot really sell me on a scenario where Battle doesn't badly outland this guy. I'm not going to say Sato couldn't possibly win a decision, but a Sato decision likely relies on him like hurting Battle badly and near finishing him twice, which could happen. But again, even with respect to the finishing upside, I'm not even sure that Sato has an edge there. Like, yes, I don't expect Battle to KO Sato, but I do think, from a jiu-jitsu perspective, Battle's got pretty like slick jiu-jitsu. Maybe not in like the gi manner like you'd expect for as a traditional jiu-jitsu player, but for a no gi guy, he is very good. He's got a very good choke game. So, yeah, I think Battle minus 300 to 400 is pretty much about right. Again, it's like a numbers play. You really it's very hard. I actually cannot see Sato winning minute to minute. He needs to land big shots here. And on top of that, you're right. We have seen Battle hurt before, but he's a pretty durable fighter. He ate some howitzers from Gore and kind of took him no problem. And the last thing I'll say, he's going to be way bigger than Sato in there. I don't think people realize it because he didn't look that big at 85, but this is at 70. I think he's got like 4 inches of height and 5 inches of reach on Sato. He's just a way bigger fighter. So yeah, I like Battle. Club and Sub Juice Week. Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that too with him dropping down to 170. I guess he did a test cut after the Gore fight and he said it went completely fine. So I'm assuming that the cut will probably be good for him again. And then just another couple points too. I mean, Sato lost the first round standing to Ben fucking Saunders.
Yes.
That's pretty alarming. That's all I'm going to say. And then if you do look at his 2 UFC knockouts, they come over the ghost of Ben Saunders and homeboy Jason Witt. Like those are the 2 guys who he's knocked out, whose durability at the points he fought both of them, incredibly questionable, where we know Battle is very durable too. I think this is a great spot for Brian Battle.
Which, by the way, it's kind of funny in retrospect, the Witt fight. I believe Sato was like minus 250 there. And Witt probably jacks him up bad if he doesn't get KO'd in the first 15 seconds, knowing what we know about the 2 now. It's just, which again, it's why I'm not betting Jason Witt this week. Anyway, we move on, and we have a ridiculous fight here. We got Terrence McKinney, Eric Gonzalez. I'm tempted to throw a bone on Gonzalez just because I like Terrence McKinney's skill set. Like, if you were to take McKinney's grappling and throw it on a guy who knew how to pace himself and had good proven cardio, I'd be pretty thrilled with that. But, McKinney doesn't pace himself. I don't know if his cardio would be good if he did, but he doesn't. And we saw in his last fight with Drew Dober, he death-gassed after about 3 minutes in that fight. And then he's posting on Twitter like last week, my goal is to never fight to a decision or something like that. But, the guy just comes out. I think McKinney's actually a fairly talented fighter. He's a very good athlete. He's a very good wrestler. He seems to have a decent submission game, and he obviously hits very, very hard. But he comes out like a bat out of hell in every single fight, empties the kitchen sink, and when it doesn't work, he gets finished. That's just kind of been the trend of his career so far. And until I see Terrence McKinney show me that he can fight to a game plan and fight composed, it's very, very tough to trust him. Now, if he's an underdog, sure, those are the kind of guys you like to back as an underdog. But in this case, he's minus 1,000. Which seems kind of crazy. And don't get me wrong, I don't really rate Eric Gonzalez at all, if we're being honest. I don't think he's very good. I guess he's got some okay pop, but he's not really a UFC caliber fighter. But what I will say is, if he's got pretty good cardio, and if he survives the first round here, I don't want to say likely to take over the fight because McKinney is skill-wise is so far ahead of him that it's like maybe a gassed-out McKinney could just take him down and lay on him. But at the same time, with the cardio dynamic being what it is, it's very hard to think, unless McKinney is legitimately like 65 to 70% to finish this in the first round, it's very hard to see how this is value because there is a distinct possibility He doesn't get him out of there. He's death gas, and then Gonzalez just finishes him. And we did see Gonzalez hurt Jim Miller briefly, I believe. So again, I don't rate Eric Gonzalez. I don't think he's UFC level, but Kaiser said it in the chat. It's like, can a guy with 4 minutes of cardio really? Can a guy with 4 minutes of cardio be minus 500? Forget about minus 1,000. And again, I like McKinney's skill set. I don't know that I'm going to bet Gonzalez because I actually think McKinney's just going to blow through him and finish him here. But it's tempting. Like, what do you think?
Honestly, I didn't really look too much into this one, but I mean, yeah, from the general sentiment that, yeah, his cardio is not great. We've obviously seen him knocked out multiple times too. I mean, just principally, I mean, yeah, you cannot be laying minus 1,000 with Terrence McKenna, just out of general principle. Someone who has potential cardio issues, potential durability issues, you just can't be laying that price. But you kind of also hit on one of my main points of it too. It's like, I just don't think Eric Gonzalez is a UFC caliber fighter. So it's like one of those scenarios where, even if he doesn't get him out of there, I kind of more so side with you in the sense that I think McKinney probably can just lay and prey on him then in that scenario too. And if you kind of look at the trajectory of Gonzalez, when he's taken steps up against okay fighters, he pretty consistently loses. Yeah. So yeah, long story short, I don't think McKinney should be minus 1,000, but in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of a levels fight. Is there any value on Gonzalez? I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'd probably just look to live bet him after a round or something and just take that route, because there's also a real chance even that McKinney goes out there and has an excellent first round, cleanly wins it. You still get, a massive number next to Gonzalez. You limit out, obviously, him getting bonked. Then in the first round, you losing your original wager. So, in my opinion, if you're looking to bet Gonzalez, I would say to take a shot on him live after one.
Yeah, I agree with that because, like, I mean, if McKinney wins the first round dominantly, he's going to be like minus 1,500 in all likelihood. So, I'm with you there. But also, it's just like, this has been a blind spot for me for years where it's like I'm too eager to jump in and fade someone like this. Eric Gonzalez is not the guy. Like, if Terrence McKinney has any kind of reasonably processed approach here, he's going to tear this dude's head off and put him to sleep. Like, that's what's going to happen. So, yeah, I'm okay with not talking any further about it. Moving on, we got an interesting one. We got Lord McCall. He's coming down to 185 for the first time, taking on Sam Alvey. What do you think?
I was honestly thrilled to hear that Mr. Lord McCall was going down to 185, because I've been yelling at the top of my lungs for years. It's like, this dude's just undersized at 205. Granted, it gave him, speed advantages and whatnot in certain matchups. It's just, you know why he was able to go 4-3. But at the end of the day, the guy is just not a light heavyweight. He never was. So I do think this move down to 185 is going to be good for him. Like, I know it's like a 20-pound difference in weight, but I don't see, like I said, he was never like a particularly large guy. Like, I don't think this cut's going to be really much for him, as he's like 6 foot tall. He was never, big jack muscle dude anyway. So I think the cut's probably going to go fine for him. Talking points with Sam Alvey are pretty much the same. It's like Groundhog's Day. He's going to stand behind the black line, look to throw counter shots. He's shown some more aggressive tendencies in certain fights, but largely patient, going to sit there and let guys dictate the pace on him. McCall's very consistent to go forward, throw strikes, has power. We've seen Sam Alvey, who's, historically been durable throughout the course of his career. He's gotten dropped in like 5 of his last 7 fights, so that's clearly not a great sign. Him going back down to 185 for this one, I think, is also not a good look, considering he's done the whole up and down thing with weight because the guy kills himself to make 185 to begin with. So I think the move down to 185 for him at this point is just a horrible idea, especially in this fight where McCall is going to go forward and push a pace. Like, my thing, like, Sam Alvey could catch him. McCall's striking defense isn't anything great by any means, but like, it's kind of another Sato battle situation for me where it's like, I don't really know how Sam Alvey wins minutes in this fight, to be honest. I mean, McCall is very consistent what he's going to do. He's not like pretty. He's kind of herky-jerky, funky, and weird, but he actually defends at distance at like 65, 66%, which is pretty good.
Good head movement.
Yeah, he blocks a lot of punches on his guard too. kind of in that weird like Dustin Poirier chilling thing that he does. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's a horrible matchup for him. And obviously the issues that McCall historically has had in many of his fights is guys who are going to come out there and shoot takedowns on him who are better submission grapplers. Well, Sam Alvey doesn't wrestle. He's only landed like one takedown in the last 4 years or something. So hard to really anticipate that. And then some like more outside based games of like mobile guys like the Dustin Jacobys and the Modestas Bukakases, those guys did give McCall some issues, but Sam Alvey, despite playing the outside, he's not a mobile outside guy. He's more of a, plant throw. So yeah, I think this is a send Sam Alvey packing spot. I honestly think McCall is a decent parlay leg this week. I don't see much merit to Sam Alvey.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I'd hear myself say it, but I think Alvey's fucking done. I think McCall's going to butcher him, to be honest with you. You know what it is? I've backed Alvey a couple times. Sometimes I've gotten really unlucky, like the Jung and Span fights were both very unfortunate occurrences. But the truth is, you touched on, the angle is Alvey hits really hard. Maybe he can put him out. Alvey hasn't knocked out anybody since Prochnio, and like that was Prochnio just walking forward with his hands down and chin in the air. The guy he's not even really hurting guys that often anymore. It's like he'll wobble someone here and there, but he doesn't have any follow up when he does it. He wobbled Julian Marquez briefly, but he didn't go and let his hands go. And on top of which, one of the biggest things in Alvey's back pocket that always allowed him to be competitive was the fact that the guy could kind of sit down in his shots and not worry about getting hit because he was durable. And as you mentioned, he's been dropped in 5 of his last 7 fights. Like that's very clearly going at a rapid pace too. So it's like he could catch McCall, but I kind of think his power and speed is kind of like deteriorating quickly. His durability's gone. We know McCall's going to come for him. Could you make an argument that, Alvey, which is usually the argument I make, that, Alvey suppresses volume with his countering. Dude, Wellington Tremont just came out there and volumed him up and then 70 significant strikes. Like, I can't – there's just –
Brendan Allen hurt him. Brendan Allen's not a historic power puncher.
No, and that's what I'm saying. It's like I can't even see – I can see the angle for him winning, but – plus 450, plus 500. I mean, is he winning this more than 15% of the time? I really don't think so, to be honest with you. Probably less, if we're being honest. I think, Olasejek's going to put out way more volume than him. I think he's a way more dangerous hitter. Unless he's badly compromised from the cut, he shouldn't really have any problems here. And to your point, he was a small light heavyweight. We've all been yelling for years for him to go down to 185. So, yeah, I don't really see many outs for Alvey here. I think he's probably going to get finished. Something I was looking at, fight doesn't go. So, like, the over here is 1.5, but fight doesn't go is only minus 170 at the moment. Now, I don't have a book that has that. But, I mean, that's what I'm seeing right now. That's what I'm looking at. Yeah. And I actually think that's a pretty decent line.
I'm going to bet that right now.
Dude, it pretty much covers the Alvey – the scenario where Alvey wins this fight, and I think McCall's going to finish him, to be honest. I kind of think this is closer to like 70, 75% that it doesn't go the distance here. And I'm not much for laying juice doesn't goes, but I think McCall, I like that. I actually kind of like McCall ITD to minus 140, to be honest. So, yeah, I think Olasejek handles him fairly easily, though. Moving on, we have a this actually is a sleeper for fight of the night. We got Ariana Lipsky taking on Priscilla Cachoira. I've seen a lot of Lipsky love, and to be honest, I really thought I would be on Lipsky before I looked at this a little closer, just because I know people love Cachoira because she goes forward and she hits hard, but I still, at the end of the day, think she's one of the least skilled fighters in women's MMA. Now, obviously, the durability, power, and cardio kind of gives her a lot of free outs, and that's why she's been able to win fights in the UFC. But ultimately, the fact of the matter is this girl got paced and outlanded by 50-plus strikes by Luana Carolina. It's just not any kind of reasonably technical striker shouldn't have many issues with her. The thing is, I say that, but I had Jian Kim live twice in her last fight. She lost a split. You know, the judges love her optics just to go forward and throw volume. And while I think Lipsky has the tools largely to win this, you know, she's certainly the more technical striker. She should be able to just pick her off at range easily. I kind of feel like Lipsky really likes like almost a beautiful fight, if that makes sense. She wants a kind of low-paced outside kickboxing match where she can make reads, pick her shots, and get off on them. If you go back and watch her fight with Molly McCann, you know, the times when they were at distance and things were kind of calm, she was hitting her at will, like with very little issue. And then when McCann would go forward, she seems to kind of panic to me. And that's kind of what worries me here. Like Lipsky doesn't love chaos, and Priscilla Cachoira is an agent of chaos, for lack of a better term. You know, that's what she thrives in. And so there's a part of me that's kind of tempted to play Cachoeira just because I know Lipsky's better at literally every phase of MMA, but I know Cachoeira is going to take the fight to her and actually get her to, you know, throw down with her in the pocket. But at the same time, the one thing that's holding me back from a Cachoeira play is I actually do think if she goes to it, that Lipsky could grapple her. Like Cachoeira's grappling is white belt level, in my opinion. She's very, very easy to take down, and once she gets down, she's very easy to advance position on. Not that Lipsky's anything special as a grappler, but like, I don't want to like throw a plus 150 on Cachoeira and then Lipsky body lock takedowns or 2 minutes into the fight and is in mount a minute later, you know. But I'm kind of tempted. I'm thinking about the Priscilla side. I'm also kind of thinking about the doesn't go because it's a plus money. The under here is plus 160. And while Cachoeira has been very durable, Lipsky actually hits a lot harder than just about outside of Valentina. Pretty much everybody catches fought. Lipsky hits harder than. One of these days, she's going to get knocked out, and she certainly has enough power to put it away. So I'm thinking about that. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, this fight's a gigantic pass for me. To me, it kind of comes down to what version of Ariana Lipsky we get, to be honest, of whether Cash is either value or not, or whether Lipsky is either value or not, to be honest. To your point, I think she's just a much more technical fighter when she needs to be. She obviously does actually pretty well in pocket exchanges. It's just like, if you go back and watch her career, like in KSW and stuff, she was so much more aggressive consistently. She would go out there and pursue takedowns. And it's like she came into the UFC in those first two performances. It was like a completely different girl out there. It was like, what the fuck? And then, you know, she's getting ragdolled on the mat by Antonina Shevchenko and stuff like that. And she obviously moved over to ATT, at least more in the recent years. And she comes out and looks like a world beater against Mandy Bohm, but Mandy Bohm is fucking horrible, who didn't even really throw / too much back and just kind of gave Lipsky honestly a really great fight. Props to anybody who bet Lipsky there. That was an excellent bet. But that's my thing, and why I think it is a dog or pass situation, though, because like you said, we know what we're getting from Priscilla Cachoeira, for better or for worse. We know exactly what she's good at. We know exactly what she's bad at. And she is going to fight the exact same way. She's not going to make any mid-fight adjustments. She's not going to make any big improvements, not any big regress. She's going to go out there, like you said, and be an agent of chaos, right? Where if I think Lipsky has the technical striking tools to keep her at bay, you know, if a girl like Jian Kim, you know, could from some capacity. I think she probably does. I think she can compete, you know, in the firefight there. She does hit hard. She probably is the one with more grappling upside in this fight, which is, to your point, ultimately why I'm personally not betting Cachoeira, just because of how bad Cachoeira's looked on bottom. I know Lipsky's looked bad on bottom, but Cachoeira shoots. The first takedown she landed in her entire UFC career was against Kim, which was a product of her getting hurt and then shooting a reactionary shot, and she wasn't able to control her anyway. But we have seen, you know, Lipsky go out there, snag up subs multiple times. I just think she's the better wrestler with more floor upside in this particular fight. So with all that being said, I would not lay minus 170 on Ariana Lipsky at all. It's completely a dog or pass situation on the money line.
Yeah, agreed. And regarding Catch's durability, I don't think it's falling off per se, but she does get hurt a lot, you know, and that's because she walks forward with her face to be punched in it. But it might go at some point. I don't really know. But actually, like Luke touched on it, you know, Lipsky is a pretty dangerous striker, when she wants to be. She certainly has, the pop to hurt her here. Moving on, we have another fun one here. I'll let you start it off, Luke. I think we both have a bet on this too. We got Augusto Sakai. He's taking on Sergey Spivak. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good spot for Spivak. I've never been like the biggest Spivak guy in the world out there, but honestly, there really isn't much to break down with this fight. I just think it's a pretty bad style matchup for Augusto Sakai. Spivak's pretty consistent to go out there and shoot takedowns. I think he's one of the better heavyweight wrestlers in the UFC. He's obviously shown good ground and pound. I think he lands over 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, where I can't get like the Overeem fight out of my head for Sakai, where Overeem does have an underrated wrestling and grappling game, in my opinion. But I mean, he is a kickboxer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And he ultimately just, went 3 for 3, and Sakai looked, absolutely gassed in that fight, dire on bottom. Granted, it was a product of Sakai kind of just bombing on him and gassing himself out, that way. But my thing is, like, outside of that in the UFC, Sakai hasn't really faced many other like heavy, strong wrestling grappling game plans. Like, he fought Tybura, who most likely would have came out there and shoot a bunch of takedowns, but he obviously killed him in like under a minute. So he didn't get to see that. So my thing is, like, I really don't think Sakai's cardio is going to hold up, even if he's able to stuff like some early takedowns and whatnot. I do think he's the better striker in the fight, but he's not like a big pure hitter by heavyweight standards or anything like that. So I'm not as concerned with Spivak getting knocked out. And I mean, Spivak, I think his hands are serviceable. I think he can compete with Sakai standing. Like I said, I would still lean Sakai in like a 15-minute pure kickboxing match, but it's just one of those fights where I don't think it's going to be a 15-minute kickboxing match. And especially if Spivak's able to get off on his wrestling early, I think Sakai is going to be exhausted when that fight starts round 2, round 3. I like Spivak to get him out of there late if he doesn't get bonked, or he doesn't have a lobotomy and just for whatever reason decides not to wrestle in the fight, which would be really, really fun. But yeah, I think with the right game plan, Spivak's like 80% in this fight.
Yeah, I have a good size bet on Spivak as well. And it's funny because I've heard people tell me, like, how can you lay juice with Sergey Spivak? And, you touched on most of it. But to me, one of the inherent issues with betting on heavyweight fights is they can be very high variance. In retrospect, Walt Harris probably should have been an underdog to Spivak when they fought, but obviously he knocked him out in the first 30 seconds of that fight. But this is one of the rare heavyweight fights where I actually think the variance meter is down quite a bit. That you touched on it. Sakai landed a flurry on Tybura that knocked him out of there, but other than that, he hasn't really demonstrated any real power in the UFC. And I don't think he picks his shots particularly well. One of the interesting things about that Overeem fight is Overeem basically just let him gas out, throwing into his guard. He never really tried to change anything up, just kept firing shots into Overeem's arms for 2.5 rounds. But, what normally concerns me with Spivak getting his wrestling going is I don't think he's a very good open mat wrestler. He doesn't have like the best double or single leg. But he is a very good cage wrestler. He has a lot of good judo trips in there. He has some decent throws, and he works pretty well from the body lock. And the thing with Sakai, Sakai is not some distant striker who's going to use a jab and stay back. He wants to go forward and usually bomb into the clinch with you and stay, in a tie clinch. And that kind of plays exactly into what Spivak wants to do. If he goes into the clinch with Spivak here, I think Spivak's going to be able to get double unders fairly easily and take him down. And as you mentioned, Luke, Sakai on bottom is a joke. It really, you mentioned the Overeem fight, and I know he was tired, but the lat drop Overeem hit him with was bad. Like, you should not be getting taken down by that, especially at heavyweight. You go back to the Ivanov fight, and he stops a takedown with about 2 minutes left in the fight, but he grabs the fence to stop it, and he's clearly going down, and it's literally just a head and arm throw.
Would have lost that fight if he didn't do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of, like, Spivak excels at those kind of throws and trips from those spots. I just think he's going to be able to get takedowns here fairly easily. And people can criticize, Spivak's athleticism wrestling, but what they can't, he's very good on top for a heavyweight. He's very heavy on top. Once he gets you there, he's very good at mat returning you once he gets you to the body lock. Throws a lot of ground and pound, has a decent submission game. And Sakai, he's just I shouldn't say one of these guys. He's one of the only guys I've seen when he goes to his back, he doesn't even try to get up. He kind of just flops straight down and just tries to throw hammer fists off bottom, which is completely ineffective because it basically allows your opponent to pass with ease. And then, your hammer fists aren't doing anything. So, yeah, it's kind of just, do you think Sakai can stuff takedowns from Spivak here? I personally don't. I know he's going to let Spivak into the range he wants to be to get those takedowns. And whatever you want to say about how janky his wrestling is, the guy has landed takedowns at an over 50% clip in the UFC. He's remarkably effective at getting them. And so I think Spivak has every tool here to dominate this fight. Like, I know it's juice, but I'm getting a guy who lands over 3 takedowns a fight against a guy who's shown zero competency on the mat. That to me, that's more than a 3-4 outcome, especially when the guy who's bad at grappling doesn't really have any power. And even as you mentioned, in the event that he can't get him down easily, I don't think Spivak's a great striker, but he throws volume. He's got a decent jab. He was basically 50-50 with both Tybura and Felipe on the feet. And while I maybe rate Sakai a tad higher than them, I think he can have success there. And the threat of the takedown probably keeps Sakai on his guard. So, yeah, to me, I'm with you. I think Spivak should be about minus 400 here. I know there's a hesitance for everybody to say, buy low on Sakai, but it's like, what are you actually buying low on? I know he was ranked very high, but if you actually remove the Tybura KO, which was like in less than a minute in that fight, we have a fight where he flat out robbed Andrei Arlovsky, like one of the worst robberies I've ever seen, in the Arlovsky fight. And then what's his next best win? Ivanov, which again, he needed to basically cheat to steal that fight. And Ivanov was gassed out about 4 minutes into it. So I'm not really sure there's any justification to say it's a buy low. The guy was a top 10 fighter. He was ranked in the top 10, but let's be real. I don't think he was ever that. I think Spivak's going to get on top of him and smash him here.
Yeah. And then one more real quick point too. If you're just like looking at UFC stats, it looks like the guy's takedown defense looks great. If you take out the Contender Series fight where he fought a bum who shot like a ton of takedowns and he stuffed a bunch, and you look just at what Sakai has done in the UFC, he's only faced 7 TDAs and has gone down in 4 of them. So his takedown defense numbers are very misleading if you just take them at UFC stats face value. And with all that being said, 7 TDAs, that's pretty much what Spivak averages per fight, right? So my point is he's going to get Russell fucked here, most likely. I don't know how anybody could have any confidence that Sakai is going to stay upright here. Like I said, maybe he could knock him out early or something like that, but the
two guys that knocked Spivak out were Aspinall and Walt Harris, both of whom are like nuclear hitters,
They're very explosive athletes too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think it's relative. I think for a heavyweight fight, it's very low percentage. And to your point, it's like he attempts almost 7 takedowns a fight, and he lands takedowns at a higher clip than Sakai's defended takedowns in the UFC. That should say a lot. So I'm with you. I don't think there's no such thing as a lock, obviously, but I kind of think, anybody that doesn't really want, there's like, oh, you can't bet Spivak. It's more just how can you lay juice with him? But it kind of reminds me, even though Sakai is better, I remember hearing a lot of the same stuff when Darren Elkins fought Eduardo Garagori, and it's like, how can you lay minus 210 on Darren Elkins? And it's like, well, one guy's a really good wrestler, and one guy's a really bad wrestler. Like it really comes down to that, So I'm with you.
That's my thing too. Like if you are this is just me personally. If I'm going to lay over 2-1 on heavyweight, it's like 95% of the time going to be on someone who can wrestle. Otherwise, I'm usually not laying that type of number on heavyweight.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. War Spivak, War Polar Bear. Moving on, I think it's my last bet so far. Juliana Miller taking on Brogan Walker. I have a small bet on Brogan Walker at plus 115 here. This is a gross fight, if we're being honest. Tough finale. But for me, I guess, I just think Juliana Miller is really, really bad. I appreciate her process and her style in that, she's just going to aggressively push forward and try to force her way to the clinch and land takedowns and do work on top. She is very physical, and obviously physicality and aggression goes a long way in women's mixed martial arts, but skill wise, I don't think she has many. She has virtually zero striking defense. Her striking offense is almost just basically a jab to try to close the distance. Even in the grappling, I don't think she's the most positionally sound fighter I've ever seen there. It's just more she tends to wear women out and then eventually finish them there. She only has 3 professional fights outside of top total. And so, like, I just don't, from a technical perspective, I think she's one of the worst technical fighters to ever be in a tough finale, if I'm being honest. And on the other side, you have Brogan Walker, who, she almost has the exact opposite problem. Miller is very, very aggressive, and this is why it's a small play for me. Whereas I feel like Walker's biggest problem is she's not physically assertive enough. But she is a fairly good counterpuncher. She's a good boxer. She hits reasonably hard. She has a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I think she can get taken down. I'm not sure she has the best hips ever, but she generally does a very good job scrambling. Like, she fought Pro Gonzalez and got taken down a bunch, but never really got held down. And so with that dynamic, I'd be a bit surprised, one, if Miller were to hold her down for like 7-8 minutes in this fight. And then 2, if she can't hold her down for 7-8, I mean, even in a scenario where Miller lands 4 or 5 takedowns here, it's very likely to be the kind of fight where she lands 4 or 5 takedowns and doesn't do a ton of damage, but it's just eating pot shots in the face over and over and over again on the feet. And even on the ground, I'm not totally convinced that Walker can't just out-scramble her and get to a dominant position here. So, like, I don't make Walker like a big favorite or anything because, as I mentioned, Miller does have a pronounced physicality advantage here, and that could be enough that maybe she can just break Walker in this fight. But I do think, the technical acumen of Walker matters here quite a bit. She has far more places where she can win this fight. She's far more experienced. She has 9 pro fights outside of tough. She has a win over Miranda Maverick earlier in her career. She just fought far better opponents than Juliana Miller has. Yeah, I think she checks every box here. It's just a matter of, is the physicality going to be too much? What do you think?
Yeah, no real strong opinion for me. I think, honestly, a pick is probably about accurate. My problem with Walker, outside of the Gonzalez fight, I mean, Blanchfield, when she was taken down, she didn't stand up. I know it's Erin Blanchfield, but it's, a part of the sample that we have. Maverick was able to take her down without much issue. The only reason she really won that fight was because Maverick gave up position and went for a shitty leg lock, and then she was able to get on top, and then she was able to, I think, stuff like a shot from Maverick in the 3rd round, and Maverick kind of just flopped to her back, kind of like the Joe Selecki, Jim Miller scenario. And then she just kind of got on top of her and rode it out that way. But she got controlled a healthy amount in that fight as well. The 2 girls she fought in the house, and Guy, who's more of a grappler, I mean, who's no good. And then Gallardo, who's a wrestler. But the thing with both of those girls, but I thought her takedown defense looked a lot better in those fights. Both girls aren't very big, though. And then Hannah Guy was able to get to her back in transition, I think later either in that 2nd or 3rd round as well. I don't think Miller's wrestling is really very good. It's kind of predicated on, trips from the body locker, dragging people down from the cage. But she is a pretty big girl. She is physical in that capacity, and that's kind of my concern. Like, and I do think she's actually pretty good transitionally. Like, if she gets Sanchez down, I guess that's where I part ways a little bit from you. I don't know if Sanchez is getting up, or Walker. Her name used to be Brogan Walker Sanchez, so I'm used to calling her Sanchez. I don't know if Walker is getting up in that scenario. But yeah, dude, Miller's striking is not pretty. What I will say, it looked at least in the house, she was pretty consistently throwing a jab. At least there's really nothing else behind that. There's no kicks. She can get hit pretty much with impunity at the same time. But at least prior to that, she had pretty much no striking at all. So at least you can religiously throw a jab. But I obviously would favor Walker on the feet. There's just much more process there. I think she does come from a Thai background. So I think she wins in the boxing. But Miller's usually pretty aggro to go for takedowns too, and just kind of force that gritty clinch fight and then just drag shit down from there. So I don't know, dude. I really have no strong read, no great opinion on this fight. What I will say real quick for Miller, she does have some pretty good W's in her grappling career. Like she beat Bea Mesquita, who's like top 10 chick. She beat
Is that submission underground though?
I think that one was in Medusa, and the one she beat Klein was in like submission on the shore. They were both escape time and
she
overtime.
got owned in those fights.
What?
Owned. She got owned in both of those matches.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, good W's.
Yeah. No. I largely agree with your sentiment, which is why it's only like a unit and a half for me. I'm not like passionate about it. It's just more, you don't often get somebody with 3x experience against someone with 3 pro fights who has nothing other than physicality behind them. So I don't know. It's kind of for me. If Walker gets muscled here, okay, I'm prepared to lose that way, but I want to see her prove she can actually do that to someone that actually can measure distance a bit like Walker can. So we'll see. Moving on, though, we got a pretty awful heavyweight main event here, or heavyweight tough finale. We got Zach Pauga taking on Muhammad Usman. Luke, any strong take from you on this?
I really don't give a shit about this fight at all, if I'm being honest. Honestly, my main concern with Pauga is that, I mean, the guy isn't really a heavyweight through and through. He's fought this whole career at light heavyweight. I just don't think Muhammad Usman's very good either. Like, I mean, going back and watching that Dontel Mays fight, it's like, oh, Jesus, man. That was a pretty bad performance. I do think he's made like some evolutions, but I don't know. I think Pauga's probably a better striker, maybe a bit better of a wrestler, probably a little bit quicker. I think Usman's power is probably a little overrated too, but like, I don't know. I went and taped the fight. Like, I still don't think the Pauga guy's very good either, to be honest. So like, I think him over minus 200 is just a little nutty. Especially, it is heavyweight too at the end of the day. I'm assuming if Pauga wins this fight, he's going to go back down to 205 in the UFC anyway. And at least with Usman too, I'm not even necessarily sold that he won his last fight to get into the championship anyway too. So I don't know, man. I think the line's wide. I do think Pauga deserves to be a favorite, but I really don't have much faith in Usman here at all.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I think I'd play Usman if he was like plus 250, plus 300 range, because I'm kind of with you on the Pauga side. I think he's like a technical fighter for what that's worth. He's got a decent jab. He's an okay combo boxer. The problem is he doesn't have any power at all. For a guy his size, he cannot bust a grade. And, usually to offset power, you either need to throw a lot of volume or wrestle very well. But he doesn't wrestle. He's a decent defensive wrestler, but he doesn't wrestle proactively offensively ever. And he doesn't have really any output. He's pretty low volume. He kind of just wants to pot shot you on the outside and point fight. And so, that kind of guy, even though I think he is massively more skilled from a technical perspective than Usman, that kind of guy is tough to have at this number. Usman, I'm with you. I didn't really think he won his last fight either. I think he's pretty terrible, but he probably throws a similar amount to what Pauga does, if we're being honest. Now, all things being equal, I expect Pauga to outstrike him because he just is a much, much, much sharper striker. But it's like volume will probably be reasonably close. Usman almost certainly has more KO equity in this fight. And even though I don't really think Usman hitting takedowns is very likely, he is the only one with real grappling upside here. And so that's the dynamic. And, I'm not passionate about it, but it does make me want to. Doesn't make me want to bet Usman, I should say. It makes me think about it a bit, though. Just because, like, all of the potential variance factors are on the Usman side, whereas, Pauga win is likely a low-volume decision. I don't know. I'm probably not going to bet it unless the line completely blows out. I'm not passionate about it. It's just I don't really – I saw someone say, oh, Pauga was the most, UFC-ready guy from this whole season. I was like, I mean – it's a pretty low bar for UFC ready if like that's what we're talking about, I mean, this fight in general is a pretty low bar. I don't think either of these guys will be in the UFC very long, if we're being honest.
Yeah, and real quick, I mean, at least on the Usman side, like maybe I'm just jaded or something. Like I didn't have a bet on this fight, but I really cannot unsee him getting outboxed and hurt twice by Brandon Sales, who's like 41 years
Yeah.
old and fucking who's not good at all. Like I can't. I don't know. I don't know.
Kaiser asked on thoughts on them being training partner. I mean, I don't know how meaningful that is because in theory both of them should be making improvements, right? But yeah, I mean, I think Pogba's going to win. I think we both do. My only argument is just like a Pogba win is on much thinner margins, which is not something you really want. If you want a minus 250, you at least want a lot of finishing equity or grappling upside, and you've got really neither of those things on the Pogba side. So anyway, though, fuck that fight. Moving on, we have Vicente Luque. He's taking on Jeff Neal. What are your thoughts, Illy?
Going into it, I thought I might be taking a pop on Neal. And from some perspective, I think at the number, he's probably the side and the line's a bit wide, but I don't know, man. I think the forward pressure of Luque, I think his optics are probably going to be a bit better. He's a bit more consistent to throw. I personally don't think Neal is going to go out here and shoot takedowns on Luque, which is I know how Muhammad beat him. So yeah, I think the fight's going to be competitive over 15 minutes where Luque just does a bit more because there's been just times of like hesitancy with Neal in some of his fights where he hasn't necessarily put a stamp on them, or certain fights where he just hasn't seemed like interested necessarily. But I do think he has like the athleticism, some of the defensive capabilities if he wants to sit on and play more of an outside high volume game. But I think he can make the margins actually pretty close in this fight, because we know that Vicente Luque is still incredibly hittable. He's been hurt multiple times. So yeah, I from some perspective, I think Neal is the side, but I'm going to pick Luque actually to win by decision here. I think the over is actually a decent look at plus money.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm leaning towards Neal, and I may even make a Neal bet, but I was a lot more passionate before I looked at it. The problem for me is like one of my biggest bugaboos in the sport when backing guys is guys that give away free volume. Because if you give away free volume, it's a recipe for disaster. It's just very easy to win minutes against you. And that's something we've seen happen to Neal over and over. And I don't know if it was the injury. I don't know what did it, but like he doesn't seem in some respects like the fighter he was when he came into the UFC. Like watching the Bilal fight, and as it turns out, Bilal, that win has aged very well. Bilal, I think, is a lot better than a lot of us realized when he fought Neal, several years ago. But watching that fight next to some of his other fights, he's very different. He was much happier to throw combinations together in that fight. And then you go and watch, Neil Magny fight, and it's like the guy's just letting Neil Magny teep him and clinch him up for 15 minutes. Even the Ponzinibbio, like I can forgive getting pieced up by Wonder Boy for 25 minutes. A lot of guys have fallen victim to that. But even the Ponzinibbio fight, he won, and it was a fairly good performance, but it was probably closer than it needed to be because he just wouldn't let his hands go in the fight. And that's a concern for me because it's like, will he let them go if Luque takes it to him? I mean, most guys do. And if he does, I think he has a lot of scope here. Like if they're just exchanging, it's hard for me to say this is past evens, especially with the orthodox southpaw dynamic, because I think so much of Luque's game revolves around, his left hook and his low kick, both of which should be neutered to a degree against the southpaw. And so I think there is real upside for Neal in this fight. If he lets his hands go here, I think he can hurt Luque. I think he can stay competitive or even win minutes, but we just haven't seen him really show willingness to do that. And even, what I think is more concerning than the fights I mentioned is like you look at the last guy that really took the fight to him was Nico Price, and he looked kind of out of sorts at distance, to be honest, in that fight. He seemed uncomfortable by the pressure, and he resorted to wrestling, and that's ultimately how he won that fight. Will he do that here? To your point, I don't really know. He had 25 minutes with Wonder Boy and never tried to change it up and wrestle. So is he going to do that with Luque? I mean, he should. I think there are some vulnerabilities. There's obviously some vulnerabilities in Luque's defensive grappling, but I don't think it's something you can rely on. And we know Luque is going to take the fight to him. I think Luque is one of the more overrated fighters in the UFC in that you look at the guy's career and he basically doesn't have any dominant fights against high-level opposition just because of how hittable he is. But he also has a very high floor in most fights because he is very skilled. He is very hittable and he doesn't cut the cage well, but he's a very skilled boxer. He's a skilled grappler. So I don't know. I'm leaning towards a Neal bet just because I do think, as I mentioned, he has all the tools to be evens or even maybe a slight favorite in this fight. He just doesn't deploy them very often. So it's how much do I trust it? I don't know. I'm actually with you on the over. I think that's a pretty interesting look. Luque's obviously famously durable, and Neal's hasn't really been hurt much in the UFC, to be honest. Plus, if he does what Jeff Neal tends to do, which kind of like bounce in and out and, just try to be very careful about shot selection, it's probably going to minimize the amount of exchanges a good amount here. So I kind of think that should be like in that minus 125, minus 150 range, not at plus money. So I might take a shot at that too. But my lean is Neal. I can't bet Luque against someone that has the potential offensive potency that Jeff Neal does. Moving on, we got a main event. That's honestly, it would have been a lot more fun 5 years ago, but it's interesting. We have Jamal Hale taking on Thiago Santos. I didn't make a bet here. I honestly thought briefly about laying the number with Hill. The problem, and this cuts both ways, the reason I thought about laying the number with Hill is I just don't think Santos is the same. I shouldn't say think. I think it's fairly clear at this point that Santos is not the same guy that he was 3 or 4 years ago. He's obviously always been a very kick-heavy fighter who's leaned on that heavily. But even his kicks, from both low kicks to body kicks, just seem – he doesn't throw them as often anymore. They seem to be a lot less effective post-knee surgeries. And then with his hands, the guy just doesn't let him go ever anymore. He had a chance to beat Alex Rakic, and he just basically lost by not doing enough. You look at the Ankalaev fight, and Ankalaev gave him an ideal fight for 4 rounds, and he was pretty happy to just never really engage hard. He obviously hurt him once, but he didn't really engage. The Johnny Walker fight, he dropped 2 rounds at distance to Johnny Walker. Like, how does that happen? He only landed 48 significant strikes in 25 minutes in that fight. So to me, Santos is clearly a shell of himself. And obviously on the Hill side, he's got very good boxing. He has incredible volume. He's a big guy for the weight class. He's got good cardio. He's a dangerous finisher on the feet. The volume of Hill should be enough to carry him in this fight fairly comfortably with the Santos that we've seen. Hill as a prospect, it's kind of weird because I think I'm high on him because he's a light heavyweight that throws with that kind of volume and that kind of power and that kind of cardio. It's kind of a rare blend of skills. But I also, and this is one of the reasons I'm not betting him, I think there are still some major questions about Hill. In particular, his grappling. We haven't seen him grapple very much. The only guy that really did is Darko, who doesn't really have a top game, but he got him down 6 times, with literally out any problem at all. And I still just kind of think Hill's defense is pretty suspect. I think when he fights somebody who lets their hands go aggressively in the pocket, he's there to be hurt. And I also just don't know how he's going to do with leg kicks. As much as Santos' tools I think have regressed, the Santos of 3 or 4 years ago was honestly the kind of archetype that would really scare me with someone like Hill. And I still think there are parts of the game where, in theory, Santos could have success. He could theoretically have success with low kicks and body kicks. Theoretically, he could wrestle for the first time since the Kevin Holland fight. Do I think he's going to do that? No, I don't. But, theoretically, it's on the table. He's a big enough hitter that if he exchanged in the pocket with him, he could hurt Hill. So, to be clear, I don't think he's the same guy, and I don't expect those skills will trouble Hill as much as they might have a couple years ago. But just the fact that they're there kind of scares me off a big juice play on Hill because I think, in theory, Santos has an interesting standing archetype for him. But ultimately, I don't think Hill's going to have too many problems here. He's a pretty good fighter. He's a good athlete. He's obviously getting better while Santos is clearly declining. But it's no play for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you broke down the fight pretty well. I guess that's kind of where it comes down to for me and kind of what you said. Like, if this fight was booked, 3, 4, 5 years ago, probably wouldn't have the same feeling I do on Hale, but it's like it's being booked in 2022. And that's just kind of the big thing with me is like Santos, he's just fought so antithetical to pretty much what he did and gave him a ton of success throughout the course of his career. Like you said, he's not really throwing kicks anymore, which I think is interesting because if you go back to the OSP fight for Hale, OSP had actually some healthy amount of success with kicks, but it's like if Santos isn't going to throw him, it's like, okay, there's that. If, the guy's, known for his ridiculous power over the years, but it's like, he's just not landing like any strikes. Like, and we're talking about 5-round contests that he's putting up like subpar 3-round fight based numbers, right? Like, and that's the thing with Hale, he's pretty consistent to throw. Honestly, obviously with the grappling perspective too, that you brought up, it's like, but Santos just doesn't wrestle. He doesn't shoot takedowns. I don't think he has a submission win in the UFC. So it's like all of these things I think I agree, like in theoretically, there are things he could do to definitely close the margins in this fight. But it's like, given our recent sample, despite fighting a higher level of competition, like there's just no evidence he's going to do that. And I think the big example of that, at least in more of a quasi step-ish down, is the Johnny Walker fight. Like that's the big red flag for me. I bet and laid chalk on Thiago Santos in that fight. I do think he won the fight, but the margins were ever so slim. Like you said, the fact that he lost 2 rounds at distance to Johnny Walker, it's like Johnny Walker is not a good striker technically at all. No. He's just a big dude who's athletic and a meme, right? That's Johnny Walker. He's not a good striker, but Thiago Santos lost 2 rounds at distance in a tactical-ish type of battle. Like that's fucking embarrassing. Like, I'm sorry, that is embarrassing. Where I rate Hale as a pretty solid boxer. I guess he could get clipped here, but it's another scenario. And in a lot of these fights we've talked about tonight, it's like, I don't know how Thiago Santos really overtly wins minutes in this fight against a guy who moves pretty well, who's consistent to be active, who hits hard. And if Santos just isn't going to do shit, then I think Hale shouldn't have much issue if he doesn't get clocked with something.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think he'd be better off he's not going to do it, but dialing it back to like what he used to do before his run and just go crazy and just throw the kitchen sink at him. Like, I actually think if he did that, he might get knocked out, but he'd have a reasonable chance of catching Hale with something. But he seems disinterested. Like, I can forgive the Rakic fight. Rakic is a tough guy to deal with. He's big. He's very technical. But, yeah, like we both said, I can't forgive the Johnny Walker fight. You cannot. You can forgive Ankalaev. You can forgive Rakic for him being low volume there. Johnny Walker and nearly losing a decision to Johnny Walker in a 5-round fight is just – it's not really acceptable if you want to call yourself a high-level fighter, So, yeah.
Every dog has his day. I'm not a big narrative guy, but honestly, this is just to me like it's flares of a passing of the torch type of fight. I think you're going to see Thiago Santos fall back into, the gatekeeper type of role going forward.
And it's like, even with respect to the areas that I think he can win this fight, Hale's only 30, which is pretty young for light heavyweight. He's obviously hasn't been fighting MMA very long. Like, he really should be making improvements in each fight. Whereas we just spent the last 10 minutes talking about how much Santos has regressed and exactly where he's regressed. And so it's far more likely I shouldn't say far. It is more likely, in my opinion, that Hale makes improvements to neutralize the areas Santos could have success than Santos actually goes to those areas,
Yep.
So, yeah, that'll do it for the show tonight, boys and girls. I wish we had more bets we could fire at you, but unfortunately this isn't the best card for him. Next week doesn't look like yet. I haven't dived too far into it, but doesn't look like it's going to be the best card for them either, but we'll break it down nonetheless. Come back next Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Lax should be back with us then. Guys, please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. As always, you got me, John. You can find me at Twitter at MMA Fox. You got Luke at SWR_betting. You guys ever want to talk fights, whatever, just hit us up, DM. We love talking about them. Yeah, good luck on your bets this weekend if you have any. And we'll see you next week, 10 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, guys. Peace.